Welcome back to our second episode of Cultural Hermeneutics. And last time we talked about a song, but today what we want to do is turn our attention to film. And film is a fascinating medium. It is something that has changed drastically over the years. And while film is still very important, it's definitely changed a lot how people consume or view films, the shared collective nature of what people watch, shared ideas. And with so many different streaming platforms now here in 2026, there are just so many different options and places for people to watch movies. But once upon a time, there was a shared experience of going to the theater and watching movies. And what I want to do is look at one particular film that premiered in 2003. Now, before we get to that film, if we go back to just personally some films that I enjoy, one thing is very distinct is that many movies and films presented a very clear distinction of a protagonist and an antagonist, or the good guy and bad guy. I remember some westerns back in the day. The good guy, the protagonist, would wear a white cowboy hat. The bad guy would wear a black cowboy hat. And then movies such as Ben-Hur pit a hero against various people and forces seeking to undermine. And even in the early 2000s, 2001, with the beginning of the Lord of the Rings series, you have a clear distinction between good and evil, and this idea that good must and should prevail over evil. But in 2003, a movie came out that drastically showed the change. Now, this change had been happening already, but it demonstrated and made culturally acceptable a change that has only grown since 2003. And that movie, produced by Disney, was called Pirates of the Caribbean. It came out in July of 2003. It was a summer blockbuster. It was a huge hit. It is one of the most popular movies that Disney has made. And it has sought something that's been tried to copy and remade in terms of the sort of idea or concept over and over and over again. But nothing has quite done as well as that first original movie. And in terms of filmography and just as a good film, it is excellent. And you can go watch many videos on YouTube of video essays just describing the quality of the movie, the storytelling, the characters, the plot. It is a movie that doesn't start with a voiceover. It doesn't start with any sort of narration that tries to set things up. It just introduces the characters and the challenges and other things very well. But the most significant detail that this movie really brought to the forefront of cultural acceptance is the beginning of blurring of lines between who is a good guy and a bad guy. The movie, without going into much details, I'm not going to give a spoiler alert as it is a 23-year-old movie at this point, but there are two sides. There are the characters who have been set back or have been thwarted, Elizabeth and Will, these young couple who have been tossed into this world of pirates and curses and things of that nature. On the other side is the British government or the British East India Company, who are seeking to control and to kill pirates. And in the middle of that, and it's one of the best character introduction scenes ever, a character is introduced called Captain Jack Sparrow, played by the actor Johnny Depp. And in his introduction, you see him majestically riding a ship into port, but as the camera pulls back, you realize his ship is sinking. He walks in, and his very first interaction, he confuses a port operator, and once he gains clearance to leave, He then promptly takes the man a money bag that is sitting there. And for the rest of the movie, Jack Sparrow is a interesting dilemma because he is specifically out for his own purposes and his own intents. While he helps people, it is always in order to, as he would use, gain leverage in certain situations. He is always trying to accomplish his own means and ends, regardless of the other individuals. Now, he ends up serving and helping the what are the good guys, Elizabeth and Will. And at the end, though, he is going to be hung as a pirate because that was the original outcome that he was intended. But Will and Elizabeth engineer an escape. Jack is able to jump over a wall, swim out to his boat, and sail away. And at the very end, what were the people who were going to kill Jack Sparrow have this conversation as the movie closes where they speak about this idea that they could afford him a little head start, and sometimes the act of piracy is itself the right outcome. And what this did is it made this very clear statement that right and wrong are not necessarily always a black and white issue, that there is a distinct right that is always right and a distinct wrong that is always wrong. What it does is it sets the tone that each circumstance, each storyline, each aspect of life has some nuance to it, and sometimes to accomplish the right outcomes, wrong processes can be allowed. And even the antagonists, and at the end, understand and express that Jack Sparrow maybe isn't an evil person. He uses unnormal and what's often considered wrong actions to accomplish good outcomes. And what this did is it brought to the forefront, and you can use the term postmodernity or other sorts of ideas, but it began a process of setting the stage where culture began to more openly express and to move towards this idea that right and wrong were not as crystal clear as once thought, that people weren't necessarily good or evil as a rule, that they do different actions, and some actions are good, some actions are selfish, some actions are bad. And it allowed that conversation to enter the public sphere, to bring that to the forefront. And this has then continued. There have been many movies after this point. They even made more Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And there are other parts of Hollywood that have continued this to the point of Disney themselves have taken previous villains or bad guys in movies and given those characters their own movies to explain the background. You think of Maleficent, who was the evil witch in the movie Sleeping Beauty, and then given her a backstory that explains that. They even did one for Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians, and this is something that is very common. They did it with Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, in the prequel movies of Star Wars. And such an action, such a process, in many ways, as a believer, is good, because one of the problems that Christianity had come to present is that there was always this clear right and wrong. But the fact of the matter is that is not the stories of the Bible. The stories of the Bible is this idea that God is good and loving, but also holy and just. And often the people he uses to accomplish his work are not clear-cut good or bad people. You take Moses, for example. He killed a man. David arranged for the killing of a man after he committed adultery. You have Samson and Jephthah. And you go through Hebrews chapter 11, which mentions many heroes of the faith, people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Many of these men had significant flaws or had done very evil or complicated things. And yet God worked through their stories to accomplish his purpose. And see, the problem is that the church and Christianity had come to agree with this modernity mindset that there was right and there was wrong, and you only were on one side of that divide. And this was a problem because it wasn't the experience that people lived out in their real lives. They knew they had struggles and they had had failures, but they were trying to do good and right things with most of their life. They experienced that, but then they saw this projection, this idea that they were either good or bad. And people struggled with that. And so the emergence of this sort of movie, these sorts of ideas, these sorts of characters resonated with individuals because they understood complicated people who weren't necessarily good or bad, but some sort of muddled mess in the middle. And in that complication, in that confusion, a character like Jack Sparrow was able to connect with people because in that character, rather than the good guy or the bad guy, they could see a character who they could connect with. And the movie ended up becoming very popular, not just with critics, but with people. And it is one that people can watch many times over because it's a good movie, but also because the characters present this spectrum of actions. Even the protagonists, the Will and Elizabeth, themselves have to go through some choices and break some rules in order to do things. And that's specifically Will Turner is the individual. He starts the movie with right and wrong and piracy is bad, and Jack Sparrow pushes him to break some rules in order to accomplish the purposes to rescue this girl that individuals are not pursuing and not working on. And so we as believers have to understand that in many ways, modernity, this philosophical idea that came in the past or post-modernity or whatever may come in the future, these worldviews are not necessarily evil or bad. It is a perspective and an understanding. And post-modernity brought with it this idea that the lines are not crystal clear in as much as people thought. And like I say, the Old Testament and even the New Testament with Peter and so many others present this idea that people are flawed and have challenges. And because of that, we as believers need to help people understand that, yes, there are challenges, that there is more complication, there's more nuance to right and wrong. As a missionary and someone who has lived in other countries, I understand that there are many things that we consider or hold normal, which are culturally based. And you go to another country, you go to another culture, and things are different. And the church has to be able to have real conversations about these topics, about these issues. The church has to be able to look people in the face and say, yes, you're not a good or bad person necessarily. However, the Bible is clear. The fact of the matter is we all fall short. And if we're not honest with that perspective, we present this idea that we are somehow better than other people, we create that dichotomy. If we understand, though, that we all are challenging and struggling and we are all failing, Moses and David and these people in the Bible had real struggles and real failures. And because of that, we need a powerful, graceful, loving God who is able to come and rescue us and able to come and die for us and save us. The fact of the matter is Pirates of the Caribbean brought a conversation to the forefront that the church should have been willing to have. And we need to continue to have that conversation. We need to talk about the actions, the choices that we make each and every day, why we make them, what are we seeking to do, and allow people to experience and understand the challenges, the difficulties of life and of reality. And hopefully that movie, if you go back and watch it, will allow you to confront that perspective. And the church must be able to present a similar idea that we understand people make failures and mistakes. That is exactly why we need a savior, not because we want to push you to be the good guy, but because the good man, God man, came because we are failed, because we have flaws, because we have difficulty and struggles and complications. That is why Jesus loved us and died for us. So come back next time as we look at more art and other cultural ideas to wrestle with as believers. Thank you.